Have you ever opened your to-do list with the intention to finally get serious, only to feel a heavy pressure settle into your chest? Not the kind of pressure that pushes you forward, but the kind that freezes you in place. The list looks reasonable at first, but then your eyes start moving down the page and suddenly everything feels enormous. Each task seems connected to 10 other tasks. Each decision feels like it could lead to failure if done wrong. Instead of starting, your brain looks for escape. You scroll your phone, you refresh your inbox, you rearrange files that don't matter. You tell yourself you are preparing, but deep down you know you are avoiding. This isn't laziness. This isn't a lack of ambition. This is what happens when the brain perceives a task as too large to safely begin. Neuroscience shows that overwhelm triggers the same avoidance circuits as fear. Your mind is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you from perceived threat. The problem is that modern work doesn't look like physical danger, but your brain reacts as if it is. And here's the surprising part. Some of the most effective people in the world face this exact mental wall. Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, Bill Gates. The difference isn't that they never feel stuck. It's that they use a simple rule to break paralysis before it takes control. That rule is known as the 10-minute rule, and it sounds almost too basic to matter. Yet it quietly powers some of the most consistent performers on the planet. In the next 14 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why this rule works, how it bypasses mental resistance, and how you can use it starting today without needing motivation, discipline, or willpower. This is not about working harder. It's about working smarter with how your brain actually functions. Most productivity advice fails because it assumes people can simply force themselves to act. Real life doesn't work that way. When the brain senses uncertainty, perfection pressure, or the risk of wasted effort, it delays action. The 10-minute rule doesn't fight that resistance head-on. It quietly walks around it. To explain how, let me introduce you to someone whose situation might feel uncomfortably familiar. His name isn't important, but his experience is. Let's call him Adrian. Adrian wasn't lazy. He wasn't clueless. He wasn't lacking resources. What he lacked was momentum, and that single missing element kept his life paused far longer than he ever expected. Adrian was a 35-year-old aspiring founder with a strong idea and a deep sense that he was meant to build something of his own. He had spent years learning, reading, and observing others succeed. He had saved some starting capital, invested in courses, and even mapped out what success could look like. On paper, everything was aligned, but every morning followed the same pattern. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and faced a growing list of responsibilities that felt heavier each day. Draft business proposal, estimated time, several long sessions, build website foundation, estimated time, multiple weekends, develop customer strategy, estimated time, many hours of focused thinking, create brand visuals, estimated time, another full stretch of effort. Together, the workload felt endless, not because it was impossible, but because it was undefined. His brain couldn't see a clear finish line. That uncertainty created hesitation. Hesitation turned into delay. Delay turned into weeks of avoidance. Each morning he promised himself he would start. Each evening ended with guilt. He wasn't resting. He wasn't progressing. He was stuck in a mental loop that looked like effort from the outside but produced nothing real. The worst part wasn't the lack of progress. It was the internal dialogue. Adrian constantly told himself that he needed the right mindset, the right plan, the right moment. He believed starting without clarity would lead to mistakes, and mistakes would prove he wasn't ready, so he waited. He opened documents, typed headings, stared at blank pages, then closed them again. He convinced himself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow came and went. Then weeks passed, then months. For 3 months, Adrian lived in a strange in-between state. Not failing, but not moving. Planning without building, thinking without doing. Eventually, the people around him noticed. His partner finally said what he had been avoiding hearing. "You can't keep sitting there pretending you're working," she said. "Either you start building this or you admit you're stuck." That night, overwhelmed and frustrated, Adrian reached out to someone he trusted deeply. His older mentor, a man who had started and sold multiple companies, someone who understood the psychological weight of building from nothing. When Adrian explained his situation, expecting criticism, his mentor laughed softly, not out of mockery but recognition. "You're not broken," he told him. "You're just staring at the peak instead of the path." He explained that many capable people suffer from what he called horizon overload. When the brain sees too much work at once, it refuses to choose a starting point. "You're trying to climb an entire mountain in one move," he said. Adrian admitted that was exactly how it felt. Every task seemed connected to everything else. If he started in the wrong place, he feared wasting time. That fear kept him frozen. "So what do I do?" he asked. His answer was simple. "You stop trying to solve the whole thing," he said. "You use the 10-minute rule." Adrian immediately doubted it. 10 minutes sounded insignificant, almost insulting compared to the size of his goals, but he stopped him before he could object. "You're confusing progress with completion," he said. "They are not the same thing." He explained that the 10-minute rule works because it directly targets the hardest part of any task, starting. Behavioral science shows that beginning a task requires far more mental energy than continuing it. This is called activation energy. The brain resists starting because starting involves uncertainty, risk, and the possibility of failure. Once motion begins, resistance drops dramatically. By committing to just 10 minutes, the brain stops arguing. 10 minutes feels safe. It feels manageable. It doesn't trigger fear responses. That small commitment lowers the mental barrier just enough to allow movement. He explained that the rule isn't designed to finish tasks. It's designed to create motion. Motion is what unlocks clarity. Motion reveals next steps. Motion turns fear into feedback. Adrian listened carefully as he broke it down. "You don't need confidence to start," he said. "Confidence comes after you start." This idea challenged everything Adrian believed about productivity. He had always waited to feel ready. He was telling him readiness was the result, not the requirement. Then he explained momentum. Once a person begins working, stopping becomes harder than continuing. This isn't motivation. It's physics applied to behavior. The brain prefers continuity. Once attention is engaged, the mind naturally wants to finish the loop. Research on task initiation shows that most people who commit to a very short work session continue far beyond their original commitment. Not because they force themselves, but because resistance dissolves once action begins. The 10-minute rule leverages this effect without pressure. And even when momentum doesn't carry you forward, something else still happens: progress. Even minimal progress creates evidence. Evidence changes identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who avoids, you begin to see yourself as someone who acts. That identity shift matters more than any single task. Zero progress feeds guilt and self-doubt. Small progress builds trust with yourself. Over time, that trust compounds. This is why the rule works across industries, disciplines, and personalities. It aligns with how humans actually behave, not how we wish they behaved. He then gave Adrian a clear framework. First, set a timer for 10 minutes, physically, not mentally. The timer creates a boundary and removes ambiguity. Second, make a clear internal agreement that when the timer ends, stopping is allowed without guilt. This removes pressure. Third, choose a micro-task so specific it feels almost too small. Not work on the business, but write 3 bullet points describing the ideal customer. Specificity eliminates decision fatigue. Fourth, start immediately. No preparation, no waiting for the right mood. The rule only works if you bypass internal debate. Fifth, when the timer ends, decide freely whether to continue. Either outcome is a win. Adrian realized something important in that moment. He had been negotiating with himself endlessly. The 10-minute rule removed negotiation entirely. There was nothing to argue about. The commitment was too small to resist. He reminded him this wasn't theory. Warren Buffett uses short reading commitments when tackling complex material. Bill Gates breaks massive problems into focused bursts to avoid cognitive overload. Elon Musk uses time blocking, which is simply the same principle applied across an entire schedule. None of them rely on motivation. They rely on systems that make starting unavoidable. Adrian went home that night feeling lighter, not because his workload changed, but because his relationship to it did. The next morning, he sat at his desk with the same list in front of him, but instead of starring, he set a timer for 10 minutes. He opened a blank document and typed one simple instruction at the top: 3 bullet points about my target customer. He pressed start. The first few minutes were uncomfortable. His mind wandered. Doubt whispered that this was pointless. But he stayed. By the middle of the session, something shifted. Thoughts began forming. Ideas connected. When the timer rang, he had something real on the page. That small win mattered more than he expected. For the first time in months, Adrian didn't feel stuck. He felt in motion. He decided to reset the timer. Then again. That day, he worked far longer than he planned, all because he committed to starting small. The following days followed the same pattern. 10 minutes on the website turned into structure. 10 minutes on branding turned into sketches. 10 minutes on outreach turned into a clear plan. Within 2 weeks, tasks that once felt impossible were visibly moving forward. The mountain didn't disappear, but the path became clear. Adrian realized something profound. He wasn't lacking discipline. He was lacking entry points. The 10-minute rule gave him one every single day. 3 months later, the same amount of time he once spent avoiding, Adrian launched his project. When his partner asked what changed, his answer was simple. "I stopped waiting to feel ready," he said. "I just kept starting." This lesson matters because right now you're likely avoiding something too: a project, a goal, a habit, something important that feels too big to approach directly. Avoidance doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care so much that failure feels threatening. The solution isn't pressure. It's permission. Permission to start badly. Permission to start small. Permission to start before you feel ready. Here, what to do when this video ends. Identify the one task you've been avoiding the most. Define a 10-minute micro-task that feels almost laughably small. Set your timer. Start immediately. When the timer ends, stop or continue. Both are success. If you repeat this process for 7 days, you will create more real progress than weeks of overthinking ever produced. Not because time magically expanded, but because action replaced hesitation. The brain doesn't need inspiration. It needs momentum. The biggest myth about success is that it requires constant motivation. It doesn't. It requires reliable starting. The people you admire most aren't more disciplined than you. They simply don't wait for the feeling of readiness. They understand that clarity comes from movement, not thought. The 10-minute rule isn't about working less. It's about working honestly with how your mind operates. It's about removing friction instead of fighting it. When starting becomes easy, consistency follows naturally. If this rule just clicked for you, act on it immediately. Don't save it. Don't plan to try it later. Use it today. One task, one timer, 10 minutes. That's all it takes to break paralysis. Progress doesn't come from giant leaps. It comes from repeated starts. Each start weakens fear. Each session builds trust. Each small win rewires how you see yourself. Remember this story. 3 months of paralysis became 3 months of building, not because of talent or luck, but because of one simple rule. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop waiting to feel motivated. Stop waiting to feel ready. Set your timer for 10 minutes and begin. The rest has a way of taking care of itself once motion starts.